Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a rather late edition of Scotland at 7 with myself, Gordon Ross. In the studio this evening to discuss the stories of the day is Day Tucker. Day is, I think, you described yourself as a sheep farmer.
A sheep farmer in rural southwest Stirlingshire.
In rural southwest Stirlingshire. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of an expert on all things to do with the countryside,
well,
shall we say.
Yes.
And I understand you also have a background in representing the interests of Scottish landowners at some point during your career.
Yes, I was a director of Scottish Land and Estates, which is the landowners' representative body for, I think about 6 years, which was really interesting.
That's quite a long time to be holding down a
Yes, maybe it wasn't as long as that. I can't remember.
Maybe it felt like 6 years.
It definitely felt like 6 years, yes. It was very enjoyable, actually, although challenging.
It's very nice to have you here in the studio, and it's actually a refreshing change to talk to somebody who's not a politician and is not a pundit and has a completely different take on the news. So welcome to the show. Our first item this evening actually is nothing really to do with the countryside, I suspect, unless you're a fruit farmer, maybe.
Yes.
And that is the business of immigration.
But it does have to do with the countryside because your dairy farms and your processing facilities are totally dependent on immigration.
And why is that?
Because they can't get people to come and do the hours, the antisocial hours in the dairy. I mean, how many people are prepared to get up at 3 a.m. every morning
to bring the cattle in
and milk them?
And
the cows are usually inside anyway, but to get on with that work. And the same in the abattoir. How many people are prepared to work in an abattoir?
Slaughtering animals and butchering the carcasses is a pretty grim task for anybody, I suspect.
You'd think it would be, and I'm sure it is in some abattoirs, but where I take my sheep to Scot Beef, I've been round, and it's not at all grim. It's incredibly clean and highly professional, and the guys who are working there processing the meat are so skilled.
And are many of them from Europe?
Oh, yes. So
you see very few workers from Scotland or the UK.
I don't know what the percentage is, but I do know that without the European workers in the abattoirs, because most of the vets who are in the abattoirs are European vets from Spain or one of the other European countries.
I'm guessing that's because they also have to certify the animals, their provenance and the conditions in which
the welfare,
they're reared and so on.
And make sure that everything's done right and it's all smooth and calm and all the rest of it. And they'll be able to look at a carcass and make sure that it's not damaged or it's carrying a disease or something like that.
So no parasites or anything like that.
Yes.
No need to wash them with chlorine, in other words.
Absolutely not. No.
Well, the figures that have come in today, and I'm just reading a little bit from Reuters, news agency, and immigration to Britain has fallen to a 5-year low, it says, ahead of Brexit. And this is coming from the Office for National Statistics. Net immigration to Britain sank to its lowest since 2013 during the year to the end of March, driven by a sustained fall in the number of immigrants from the European Union since the Brexit referendum. So we can see it's already having a damaging effect before Brexit has even happened.
That would be to do with the fall of the pound?
And also, I guess, the pound falling means they're not going to earn as much.
Yes, because if you think about it, during that period, was it not more that we had immigration from Poland?
Indeed, because the pound was quite high in value, and so they made a lot of money.
Right, and Poland's economy picked up for a while, and still is, I think. But so there was less incentive for Polish people to come over. But I can tell you that in the dairy farms, the Polish people contribute tremendously to the workforce. They've got a fantastic work ethic, yeah.
I also understand, actually, that most of the migration into Scotland has been predominantly from Poland. Yep. Something like 60% is the figure I saw recently. Yes. I was astonished by that.
Well, most of our hotels, the workforce is Polish. Yes. All the trees that I've planted in my... we've got about 25% of the farm is in trees. Yes. And we planted, I can't remember how many million trees in 2006-07. It was Polish workers who did
planted
that.
Those trees.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of them are still living locally.
And
they've got their own wee businesses now.
And stayed.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's obvious that immigration to Scotland plays a very important role, especially in the countryside, which is obviously your area of expertise and knowledge. But also, as far as I understand it, it has a huge effect not only on like the tourism industry we're describing, workers in hotels in rural Scotland, but also in health service, I believe.
Yes, of course.
There was a report today in the national newspaper from 2 surgeons who said that they've had to cancel operations because the nursing staff were just not there to look after the patients post-op. And this was because most of those nurses were coming from European Union countries. They're all gone home. They didn't want to stay.
Yeah. And you're just talking about hospitals.
And that's just hospitals.
Look at all the care homes.
Indeed, yeah.
So
there are a lot of European workers working in the care industry, hospitality, all of the jobs that people don't like doing. Really, the tough jobs have been done by Europeans. Well, as well as that, speaking of Europe, we have the Prime Minister at the moment in France, or he has been in France today, speaking to the French President, Mr. Macron. He seemed to get a fairly jolly welcome, but I honestly, watching it, got the impression that Macron was going through the motions somewhat.
Yes.
Lots of glad handing and handshaking and posing for the camera, but they claimed that the talks were constructive. I think that's diplomatic.
Well, they wouldn't they?
It's diplomatic speak for nothing happened, but we were quite friendly.
Yes. But the European, the leaders, they've always been incredibly calm, under control, and very, very polite.
And fairly mature, I always
Pretty
think,
mature.
when I see them, especially with people like Donald Trump.
Yes.
They exercise enormous patience and forbearance. Now, Boris Johnson has said, just talking about immigration, he's been talking about this as well, and talking about migration from outside Europe, which Britain's government has much more legal control over. And that has steadily risen after a dip in the middle of the decade. Despite the British government goal to cut the net immigration figure to under 100,000 a year, it's still climbing. So even leaving the European Union is not going to stop net migration from rising.
No.
Because, well, let's face it, London is a honeypot for people who want a better life.
Yes.
It's very attractive, I guess, for anybody coming from a poor country to head to London. I mean, it's a Dick Whittington kind of attraction, I think.
And you have to ask yourself as well, if you compare economies like in India, are people coming from India, and they're incredibly skilled,
and often extremely knowledgeable,
yes, and
qualified.
IT and stuff, but their pay is very, very low, probably lower than people in the European Union, even from the Eastern
Bloc. Is this because
Bloc.
they're not EU citizens and therefore they're not subject to the same
possibly
labour regulations that European Union workers would be
yes,
afforded?
I think so.
So
yeah.
Human rights come into this, labour rights, the lack of recognition of unions, this kind of thing. Boris Johnson has said that after Brexit, future immigrants from the EU will be subject to an inverted commas, skills-based test similar to that applied in Australia, as well as criminal record checks. Now, I remember, as well as this, this method of choosing people who are going to come here, that they also have to bring with them a job of £36,000 a year.
Yes.
Now, forgive me for being cynical, but isn't that really a catch-22? You have to have a job that pays you 36 grand before you can enter the UK.
Yeah.
But you can't get a job in the UK until you've actually entered. I mean, it's crazy.
That would rule out some doctors.
Some doctors and probably 95% of the entire population of Scotland would be forced to leave if we were European.
It's unbelievable. I do remember seeing on BBC Parliament, Alistair Carmichael standing up, warning us about the dangers of relying on there's a committee called the Immigration something or other committee, and they are the ones who advise, the Immigration Advisory Committee, I think it is.
Yes.
They advise the government. And he went through the list of these people on this committee, and the furthest north was somebody who lived in Hull. The rest of them lived far south.
So they had no knowledge.
They had no knowledge.
Of anything.
No. And he quoted all sorts of things. And not that I'm a fan of Alistair Carmichael, but he was very good on that speech. And he was pointing out how the essential workers on fishing boats in his constituency, how essential these migrants were. But they wouldn't get in because of the
earnings limit.
And not only that, it was a skills list that didn't fit. He said they would only allow them in if they were to study for 2 years and to learn for 2 years. He said, but a deckhand, you need somebody skilled to do it. You can't just bring
also
in.
The safety factor involved.
Yes.
A fishing vessel is, people are risking their lives to fish.
Yes, absolutely.
And so they have to be skilled, experienced people.
Yeah.
I have some other figures here which have been released. And this is from the SNP's Media Relations Department. And they're talking about how the ONS figures reveal that EU immigration is actually threatening Scotland's economy at the moment, before Brexit has even started. The figures are showing that immigration for work is now less than half the level it was in June 2016, half the level. So it's 50% down, and Brexit hasn't happened.
Hasn't even happened.
So what happens when the other 50% finally realise that it's over? We'll be left almost with no one. Earlier this year, the Expert Advisory Group on Migration and Population had warned the UK government that immigration plans could reduce the number of workers in Scotland by up to 5% over the next 2 decades. I think that sounds like an underestimate.
I agree, yes.
With your knowledge of the countryside and farming particularly, and land management, do you feel it sounds like a ridiculously small amount of people actually to claim that. I'm trying to find the exact figure he's quoted here. The ONS figures show that migration for work's less than half, and in the year ending 2016 at minus 7,000 in the year ending this year. 7,000 down.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many migrants are currently employed, or approximately, in the
an
land
awful lot
management?
more than that. I know that the figures that they said they were going to do the trial on, was it 2,000 or something? Well, one farm. No, be more than one farm, but 2,000 wouldn't cover the workers that are needed for the berry picking.
Yeah, fruit
Scotland,
picking is particularly
yes.
has to be done by hand.
And that's not counting the vets that you need at the abattoirs and the other people in like the people who and they are skilled, who are planting all these trees. We're supposed to be planting all these trees for climate change. Who's going to plant them?
Yeah. Well, the Tory government, according to the SME, the Tory government's threatening Scotland's economy and public services with its extreme Brexit and hostile migration policies, which it knows will leave Scotland poorer and worse off. They know this is going to happen, and yet they're still carrying on with this. The SNP say that immigration is an economic necessity for Scotland. It's not a luxury. We can't afford to chuck these people out. Bringing huge benefits for everyone who lives here and contributing to the success of the NHS, public services and finances. And of course they all pay tax. People forget this. They don't come in here and take your jobs. They come in here and they work
contribute,
hard. And they do the jobs that we don't want to do. And they get paid less than we do for doing so. And they pay the taxes.
Unless they're working in a dairy farm, because because they do get paid quite well in the dairy farm.
But I'm guessing that's because that's largely EU controlled, and there's an awful lot of regulation around it.
There is, and there's a shortage of skilled work, and any skilled labour does get rewarded because you want to hang on to them.
Well, I know that the SNP is going to say at the end of this public press release that the only way to cure this is to leave the UK. and set up ourselves
Yes.
with our own regulations and our own
Yes.
immigration rules. Would you support a move like that as somebody who
Yes.
runs a small holding? And,
Yes,
has,
because our government in Scotland would be doing what's best for Scotland, whereas Westminster is clearly doing, it's almost doing the opposite. Well, it is doing the opposite, but it's almost like they're doing it on purpose, to quote a phrase from...
I think they're almost trying to force us out, make it so horribly unpleasant that we actually
Yes.
want to leave.
You
Feels
can't
like
help
that
thinking
sometimes.
that.
Yeah. And raising the retirement age to 75, I think it's probably angered just about every single person in the entire islands.
Yes.
Okay, let's come back to Brexit just for a moment, and to the border in Ireland.
Right.
Now, I'm resisting the temptation to call it the Irish border, because we know it's not an Irish border. It's a British border that we're
Yes.
talking about.
Yes.
And it's a British border which up until now has not actually existed due to the peace deal that was struck
Yes.
with
yes.
the European Union and the United
Yeah.
Kingdom.
Yeah.
And it was a very expensive treaty in terms of lives,
Yes.
and the sacrifices that both countries made to achieve it. And I think President Macron said today, and reminded Boris Johnson, that this is a peace treaty that was partially brokered by the European Union. It wasn't just
Yes.
the United Kingdom.
No, it wasn't.
And it wasn't just the Irish
Yes.
Republic. This was a pan-European project.
It was.
Also involved America, as I recall.
Yes.
And so it's a major international peace treaty.
Yeah. Yeah.
The UK cannot break it.
Well,
Well, we'd hope
We're
they
t-
cannot
we
break
hope
it.
they
But
cannot
it looks
break it.
like they might be wanting to do exactly that. Okay. We have talked about migration a fair amount. There is a lot of statistics on migration and the types of people coming in and out. The latest figures for the whole of the UK, as I say, are showing it at its lowest level since 2013. 200,000 EU citizens arriving this year to the end of March. And it says the main reason for the decline is fewer people arriving from the EU to work.
right.
Quite simply, they don't want to come here anymore.
Yeah.
And the UK's hostile environment is
Yeah,
working.
well, hostile environment and the falling pound, I would have thought.
The combined force
the
of
two,
not
yes.
being welcomed and
Yes.
receiving less money.
You know, I can't imagine anybody wanting to go to a country where it's been evident that they're not welcome.
And according to some other figures I have here, Scotland has only had 50,000 applications for EU settlement schemes. Out. Okay, so the number of people coming into Scotland from the EU has fallen to 59,000. So it's bad news all round. It
Yes.
just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And on top
And
of
is
that,
affecting our economy.
indeed, yeah, and it's sneaking up on us before we've even got to
Yes.
Brexit.
Yes.
Now, going back to Boris Johnson's meeting with Emmanuel Macron, Macron has described the Irish backstop as indispensable
Yeah.
to a Brexit deal and urged Boris Johnson to set out his proposed alternatives as soon as possible. Does anyone seriously believe that Boris Johnson has any alternative that he can cook up in a month? I find it
Well,
a struggle to believe this.
clearly
could
there
happen.
must be. All those people who worship him believe
think so?
him. And, you know, they truly believe that.
How can he pull a rabbit out of the hat here? Let me make a few more. Give you another couple of quotes. Macron said that he stood united with Mrs. Merkel, and that the clock was ticking, and it was not possible to wait until the last minute to find a solution. He also said the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, could be involved in finding an answer without totally reshuffling the withdrawal agreement. That sounds to me like a diplomatic way of saying we can't change the ingredients, but we could maybe change the order in which they appear.
Oh, right.
Reshuffling the the deal. If they put the Irish border as the beginning of the deal rather than the backstop, if they made it perhaps front and centre, they might be able to agree something. But the British government has had 3 years to think of a way of policing a 300-mile border with over 280 roads crossing it.
Yes.
Which is entirely porous.
Yes.
In a country which has a terrible history with that border.
Well, even when the border guards were there was crisscrossing going on.
There was smuggling as well going on. But the main problem was it was the border itself that was the flashpoint.
Yes.
That was the reason why the violence was happening.
Yeah.
Macron also said we should all together be able to find something smart within the 30-day deadline if there is goodwill on both sides. Now, I'm sure there's goodwill, but goodwill is not enough, I don't think, to come up with a solution to this. Macron, I think, said finally, we need to try to have a useful month. Now, that really doesn't speak of confidence from Emmanuel Macron. And I know that the French have a lot to lose with Brexit because they share a border with England. Right. The Channel Tunnel comes up, obviously, both sides of the channel. They also have their ferry ports in Calais. And other ports along the English Channel would suffer. So the French probably would suffer disproportionately. Not as badly as Ireland, perhaps, but badly enough. And I think Macron sounds to me like he's at the end of his tether with this as well. Wow. He said also that the backstop was both an indispensable guarantee for the stability of Ireland and a means of protecting the integrity of the European single market, and that any new UK ideas had to respect that. Yeah. The last time I heard any new UK ideas on this was 2 years ago, before Theresa May negotiated the deal. And even then, there was still no idea how they would fix this.
Yes.
But the backstop, as I understand it, means that if the British government does find a solution and the backstop becomes redundant, if Britain can demonstrate to the European Union that there is a workable solution, how do we allow cattle and livestock, trucks, farm vehicles and people crisscrossing the invisible border to do that still and be able to monitor it properly? I don't think it can be done. No. Not without drones in the sky and everybody microchipped. Actually, somebody once suggested microchipping everyone in Ireland. That was a serious suggestion. Microchipping people. In the same way that you microchip an animal or a dog.
Some people have got microchips voluntarily. Yes. I don't know what was behind it, but some
maybe
people.
An experiment to see how they moved around, or
I don't know what it was.
Interesting.
But it is possible. You're quite right.
The talks in France and Germany seem to really have achieved almost nothing.
It's window
Boris
dressing.
Johnson's platitudes notwithstanding, I mean, he says things like, we think there are ways of protecting the integrity of the market and allowing the UK to exit from the EU, all and entirely perfect, as it were. I mean, it's a nonsensical statement. It's a fairy tale, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Johnson added at the end that technical solutions were readily available. Like you could go down the supermarket and buy them off the shelf to avoid checkpoints. But he didn't spell out his clear alternative to the backstop. It's waffle, really, isn't it? It's rhetoric.
I wonder if he's talking about the kind of things that Waitrose have, where you self-scan it.
You scan yourself as you go over the border.
Yes, you scan it yourself, and it adds up.
I guess you can do that for some things, but there must be checks for things like animal welfare and things like that if you're transporting livestock across the border.
Yeah, because it's not just about the actual goods, it's about the condition of the goods as well.
Indeed, and checking that refrigerated trucks are at the right temperature, things haven't gone off, and that they're clean enough. Also, so it's still related to Northern Ireland.
But again, it's not something that we can do in 3 weeks' time.
It's not something I don't think we can do in 3 months' time, actually.
No.
More from Reuters here. At this time, Northern Ireland's police force says it doesn't have sufficient resources to effectively control the border with the Republic of Ireland if the checkpoints are reinstated in the event of a no-deal Brexit, its chief said. So the police service of Northern Ireland can't cope, and they've admitted this. So whatever happens with Brexit, that border can't be checked.
That's right.
The police won't have enough staff to do it.
And
the Gardaí on the southern side, the Gardaí will also have to man their side of it somehow. 280 odd miles of it. That's a lot of people.
That's right. And the conflict that there is between the specials and some people in Northern Ireland and the south. If you remember, the crossing a border was quite a dodgy thing to do, depending on what religion you followed.
Yeah, and you could be stopped.
And do we know that they've got through that? I don't think so.
Well, it also says here, and this is from Chief Constable Simon Byrne, who is the head of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, that a no-deal Brexit could have a detrimental impact on security of the British-run province, which has been at peace for 2 decades after years of political and sectarian violence. He said, we have less than 7,000 officers here these days. We simply don't have enough people, even with the recent budget uplift, to cope with some Brexit challenges to actually police that. So it seems hopeless that whatever happens with Brexit, it is going to cause severe problems in Ireland, no matter what. Well, let's leave Northern Ireland for the time being. It seems a completely intractable problem unless Brexit is suddenly called off.
It's bizarre the way Northern Ireland, for us up here, it was the first thing that a lot of people up here thought about when Brexit reared its ugly head. Yeah. And everybody said, but Northern Ireland, they haven't thought about Northern Ireland. Theresa May hasn't thought about Northern Ireland. And as the 3 years have gone on and pronunciations have come out from Theresa May and all the rest of them, it's been quite clear they have no concept of what Northern Ireland's history is.
No. They've no idea what the risk is of what they're doing.
No.
And even if they did, they don't seem to care very much what happens to the people there. Or the people up in Scotland, for that matter.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on from Northern Ireland for a while before we get too depressed.
Yes,
it's a pretty depressing subject. And move on to another equally depressing subject, the UK retail sales, which have collapsed at the fastest pace since 2008, according to the Confederation of British Industry. So British retail sales have collapsed at the greatest rate since the great crash of 2008.
Yes.
And again, Brexit has not even happened yet. According to a survey published on Thursday, added to signs of a slowing economy ahead of Brexit in just over 2 months' time. I'm going to just have a quick look at the other side of this handout, because some of these handouts we only get a sort of headline on, but the meter of this, as it were, is on the other side. So it says here, between these extremes of reported rising and falling sales volumes. The sales volumes have slumped to negative 49 in August. I take it that's percentage points, but I could be wrong once you see how they've measured it. And that was worse than all the forecasts in a Reuters poll of economists that pointed to an improvement of minus 11. So it's almost 4 times worse than predicted.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on in the retail sector that is causing it to plunge at such an ungodly rate?
Well, are we talking the grocery retail sector?
It's taking general retail sales data from the high street, I believe, and it's looking at, it says basically, until recently consumers had largely taken Brexit in their stride, helped by wages growing faster than the rate of inflation. And helped to support the growth at that time, with many companies having cut back on investment because of uncertainty, but left the economy reliant on consumer spending.
Yes.
And now consumers are beginning to see the writing on the wall and thinking, hang on a minute, things are going to go wrong soon. I have to stop spending this money and maybe start hanging on to it in case I need it. So this, I think, is a very bad sign that people now...
We've got 3 weeks. They've waited till 3 weeks before...
Indeed.
Potentially. Oh, dear.
Well, according to this, Britain's economy contracted in the second quarter of the year, and we will enter a recession if it shrinks again before September. We'll officially be in recession, and we haven't even exited yet.
No.
Okay, the data firm...
and there will be denial that we will be in a recession.
Yeah. According to the data that's come in here from the firm IHS Markit, British working age households were growing more cautious about making major purchases. So they're not buying things, big ticket items like washing machines, tumble dryers. They're not buying sofas. They're not buying so many clothes.
Yep.
All the kind of things that would be classed as, what would you say, discretionary purchases that you would make with money that you have spare.
Yeah.
So people are thinking, well, we've got the spare money, but really we don't want to be spending it now because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
And so people start to stockpile food and things like that now.
Yes.
And I know of some people already doing that.
I think so. But also the goods are more expensive because if they've been imported,
Then
because
with
let's face it, the
so
UK is a net importer of everything. The exchange rate is so poor, has been getting poorer and poorer. So it's been more expensive to buy things. So there'll be that to add into it as well.
I read yesterday that the current exchange rate, the pound against the euro, the euro was at 93 euro cents to the pound. So almost parity.
Yeah.
The pound and the euro are almost level. So buying things from the European Union now is far, far more expensive. I mean, up until 3 years ago, it was over 125 or something like that, euros to a pound.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have fallen a long, long way, and I think there's further to fall as well, as I understand it.
And yet, the Brexit people won't acknowledge that.
They don't seem to care.
They don't seem to. Well, they don't even acknowledge that that's the case. They're trying to pretend that it isn't happening.
Well, the final piece in this story on Brexit, actually, that I have here from Reuters is just a comment from Macron as Mr. Johnson was leaving, and he's basically said that it's too late for a new Brexit deal.
Yes,
he's basically said it in as many words. It's too late for you to create a new deal, and I would read that as meaning, why are you even here?
Yes. Yes.
You know, you're wasting our time and yours with this. You should be back home preparing for no deal.
That's right.
I know that the European Union is now in full readiness for a no deal Brexit.
Yes.
And people in Europe have been expecting it now for a while. The only people still in denial, I think, are a lot of the British public who still seem to think it's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
Sentiment is crumbling, apparently, according to this retail survey, among retailers. Unexpectedly weak sales have led to a large overhang of stocks. So they're carrying a lot of stock that they bought at a higher price. They can't shift it.
And they can't shift it.
With investment intentions for the year ahead and employment down, retailers expect a chilly few months ahead. More euphemisms for no customers, no profits, and a vast stockpile of goods that they can't flog because they're going to make a loss on them, basically. And I wouldn't want to be a retailer on the high street
and
at the moment.
They've used up they've probably had to borrow money to stockpile, and now they can't stockpile a second time
because they've used up all their credit.
Because it's moved from, when was it, March we were supposed to leave, and now it's gone to October. So
somebody pointed out to me 2 days ago something that I had forgotten, which is that the Brexit date of the 31st of October is the final date at which we can leave. But the United Kingdom could choose to leave much earlier than that. Right. Boris Johnson could say tomorrow that there's no hope of a new deal. We're going to leave tomorrow. Right. And there would be very little we could do about it, apparently. It would create a seismic kind of shock to the country. And you see what I've been doing there with this lovely segue into fracking and earth tremors. Yes. Okay, apparently I've been told that this story about they can leave at any time is actually fiction. I've just been informed.
Oh, really? But that's what...
It would have to be agreed with the EU. They would have to agree to it as well.
Right,
and they haven't so far.
Right.
Technically, I suppose it's true that they could leave at any time if the EU said okay.
You see, there's a current running through everything that with this, and I know that people will say the EU is undemocratic, but the EU does not want to be seen to be dealing with a government that is appearing to be undemocratic in its actions.
Which it definitely
which it is,
to be,
and becoming worse.
Well,
and you have to say to yourself, well, why are the EU just refusing to give in to this? But they're a very big legal organisation.
They're massive.
And they cannot be seen to deal with a government that actually may not be representative of its people.
I think they know that.
Mm-hmm.
And
they
also,
wouldn't say it, of course, but...
It's also a government which is forcing some policies on its own people. And I don't mean in Scotland, I mean in Lancashire. We have a story here about Quadrilla, the fracking company who are trying to extract shale gas in Lancashire at the moment. And today's news is that Quadrilla has had to halt fracking again after the biggest earth tremor yet at its Lancashire site. They're calling it a microseismic event, which measured 1.55 on the Richter scale. Now that doesn't sound like much, and perhaps it isn't a great deal in terms of shaking at the Earth's surface. But what it does show is that what Quadrilla was saying about how safe the process is, and how the idea of earth tremors and earthquakes was just nonsense. It was not going to happen. It's been happening repeatedly in Lancashire, it seems, and it's been getting worse. And when they have to halt fracking at their site, it means there must be a risk to the wellhead. If that well is shaking, then there's a chance it might crack.
Yes.
And if it cracks, the pressure build-up from inside that well could fracture and cause an explosion of mud and a release of gas, if nothing else. It could cause a serious accident.
Yeah.
The fracking firm has said that it likened it to a large bag of shopping dropping to the floor. Now, they would, wouldn't they, really? Whoops, we've dropped a bag of shopping on the floor, we have to stop drilling. That doesn't really make any sense, does it? So I suspect that although they are trying to find a sort of layman's method of explaining it to people, but the tremor is higher than the previous record quake at the same site, which was 1.5. This is 1.55, so it's gone up quite a bit. Quadrilla has been blamed for the earthquake rules for stifling the UK's shale industry, so they're complaining that every time they cause an earthquake, they have to stop drilling.
Right.
In Scotland, as you probably know, there is a moratorium on drilling for shale gas, and it's the Scottish Government's policy on it is that the shale gas companies have to prove the safety and effectiveness of their technique before they will license it. Yeah. And so far, none of them have drilled a single hole and actually proved anything to the Scottish Government, which leads me to believe that perhaps they can't prove that it's safe. Yes. Have you had any experience with landowners or with shale gas in your
one of our landowners who's in the sort of Clackmannan foothills area, which would be affected, he got very excited because he thought this was going to be a great opportunity.
Strike gas in his land.
And he'd never heard of it before. And I said, well, hang on a minute. And I sent him some links. And I said, I don't know that you really want to go there. But I sent him the links, and I don't know what he did with it in the end. But and then the other side of the landowners are the farmers. And we certainly had lots of NFUS meetings with farmers in the Central Belt who were very concerned about it. One in particular who's, again, near the Alloa, along the Forth there. Yeah. And his point was that this would interfere with the water that the cattle were drinking.
Yeah, because the water sits above the shale.
Yes.
And therefore any gas or mud or contaminants are going to rise up through that water table
Yes.
and pollute it.
So
And it has happened, hasn't it? In North America, there's been
yes.
several cases of
Yeah.
water.
And Australia.
Water that comes out of the tap you can actually set fire to. And rivers that burn.
Yeah, and a bit like the Brexiteers, people who are pro-fracking will say, "Oh, that's all they're just, they're putting that on. It's imagination." But I don't know. What isn't imagination is our heaviest populated area is across that central belt.
And also, if I recall correctly, it's also riddled with hundreds of miles of disused mine shafts.
Absolutely, yes.
And mine galleries, which
Yes.
are full of water at the moment.
Exactly, yes.
and
And
they
you've
could
already got
collapse.
subsidence in some areas. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to live in County Durham, and I don't think there was a house in County Durham that didn't have subsidence. We're maybe not quite as bad up here, but certainly across the central belt, it's a huge risk.
I know that in some coal mines, there have been, even disused mines, there have been continuous releases of gas
Yes.
from the mine seams as well, even though they've been derelict for maybe 100 years.
Yes.
And some of them still releasing toxic
Yes.
gas.
Yes.
And it bubbles up, as you say, through the groundwater. And obviously, if you're a farmer, perhaps you have, I don't know, a field that you need to irrigate. You might be pumping that water
That's right.
from
Yes.
a borehole.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if it's full of contaminants, that's going onto your fields. It's going to poison your vegetables or your feed.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, okay. So the government has responded to the study, saying that the exploration is necessary to understand whether shale is safe and economic. And it doesn't say which government this is. I'm assuming this is the British government, since this is happening
They
in the
are
north of
allowed
England.
to give out the licenses. So Jim Ratcliffe has got the licenses.
This is the man who owns
Grangemouth.
the Grangemouth Petrochemicals, and also owns Ineos, a massive
Yes.
shale gas company.
Yes, but the Scottish Government have been quite clear, and they've had brickbats for it because the Greens say they should ban it.
Yes.
But if they ban it, from what I've heard, they can then be legally challenged.
They would
and
challenge
they could
it
lose.
in the Supreme Court in England
Yes.
and overwhelm
So
it.
what they did was they thought, right, we'll put a moratorium on it, and that way we can hold it back.
Well, that way they'd have to prove it was safe, and the
Yes.
Scottish Government obviously knows that they can't do that.
They can't prove it.
And so it's an effective ban.
Yes.
It's more
yes.
effective than a ban, in other words.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Right. Well, we're coming to the end of that story, and we're going to talk now about the so-called GERS figures, the general. The general expenditure and revenue Scotland figures.
Yes.
Now, as far as I remember, Dee, you have some experience with these when they were first.
Only on Twitter.
Only on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm no good with figures or numbers or anything. It was purely instinct, and my emotional intelligence antenna went up when this came up.
Was this in this particular round of GERS this
No,
year,
no,
or is
this
in
would be-
previous years?
Oh, I'm not good because I'm so old now. It would be at least 3 years ago.
Okay.
And one of my colleagues, another director on Scottish Land and Estates, the two of us used to tweet each other, and he would be one side and I'd be the other.
So
and
you would be having
we'd be having a right
battle of
good,
words
a
online.
friendly one, but and I remember saying at the time when the GERS figures came out, and I said, I'm not comfortable. I don't. Where did these figures come from? Who's making up these figures? Oh, Scottish Government makes them up. Where does Scottish Government get them from? How do they pull these figures together? Where does it come from? Oh, but if you don't believe Scottish Government, these are their own figures, and they're actually telling you how bad things are. I'm saying, no, I'm sorry, I don't buy that. And the two of us were having this ding-dong, and then other people enjoyed.
Did you find out where the figures actually came from?
Yes, and I was right. They came from Her Majesty's Revenue, HMRC, and the Treasury. But, you mean originally? Who thought up this?
I'm thinking about the statistics themselves must have come from the British government, because Scotland does not have an office. It doesn't have an office of statistics.
And all the rest of it. Yes, but I've got this.
But
thing.
the Scottish government publishes these figures, even though the Scottish government doesn't. Yeah, they don't actually collate them.
I find it bizarre that they would just sit back and accept these figures. And I keep thinking, well, they must have a long-term game plan for this.
Well,
Stuff that gets thrown at them every year. And it's like pulling you down into a slough of despond, and you've got to climb your way back out of it. And there's no way really until recently of climbing your way back out of it, because nobody knew what these figures were or what their source was.
of course, the figures, though, don't take into account the huge amount of money which we pay, which is spent outside of Scotland on projects which are absolutely of no benefit, to us whatsoever.
Scotland. Yeah.
For example, I mean,
Like
the first one,
HS2.
High Speed 2. The government is already talking about cancelling. They were trailing their coat yesterday, saying they were going to review it.
Yeah.
They've already spent £7 billion for nothing, trying to chuck people out of their houses. And all the departments in London basically being funded. And all these people that are employed, they're all basically, this is money that they have derived from Scottish revenues.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have no benefit whatsoever from any of it.
No.
And their employment as well doesn't pay any revenue to us. There's no flow back across the border into Scotland.
What they're saying is they are spending it on our behalf. Well, I challenge them to show us how we benefit, as you've just pointed out, from even just that one thing.
What did it buy us?
What does it buy us? What does it get us?
Because as far as I understand it, looking at the figures that we have for our revenue and our expenditure, Scotland generated about £63 billion in the past financial year. But we've only received £28 billion as the so-called block grant, our pocket money, after the UK has taken this huge chunk of it away, which we never seem to see again, and we don't see any benefit.
Yeah. But even the 60 plus billion is a conservative estimate, because they've got, in there's a block of so many billions, and it says unidentified region.
Of course,
well,
the
you can
North
guess
Sea.
which that one is.
The North Sea. The other thing that came out of these bizarre figures today is that the British government was alleging that the Scottish people, basically, were responsible for 50% of the United Kingdom's national deficit.
Yeah.
And the other half was the responsibility of the Welsh.
Yes.
I just, honestly, I just laughed when I saw these figures at first. And not only that, but the Northern Irish people have a 9% blame in this as well. So we have something like 120% of British debt is not England's
has been accrued
fault.
by us. And,
And that suggests that England made £11 billion in profit last year, which is nonsense. It's so deep in debt they can barely even borrow anymore. So these figures are fairy tales.
They're crazy,
fantasy.
but they're getting crazier each year.
The other thing that I discovered from this, somebody else pointed this out to me today, is that Scotland pays 5.9% of its GDP for defence.
Yes.
We have the highest defence spending in the world.
Really?
We spend more money per head on defence in Scotland than the Americans do. And the rest of the UK spends just over 2%.
Yeah. And do you ever hear stuff like that from the BBC? Do they ever inform their viewers about this?
Of course not.
No.
But people of Scotland are expected to believe that we are being so well defended because we're spending nearly 6% of our GDP on defence, when we know that the only thing that is going on is 240 warheads in a holiday mountain in Coolport. Which we didn't want in the first place.
That's right.
It is, the more I read of the GERS figures, the more
fantastical,
ridiculous it seems to me. And I honestly think when I saw these published that this was a provocation rather than an accurate description of what's really going on.
I
think, as somebody said, they are extracting the urine here. If you pardon the expression, but they were really just yanking our chain here.
Yeah. And you know where all this came from?
Tell me.
Ian Lang, who was Secretary of State for Scotland, came up with this jolly wheeze. Jers, the jolly old wheeze.
Wasn't it?
Let's give the Scots a good old squeeze. And that's what happened.
As I recall, Sir Ian Lang, as he now is. He's now a Tory peer, isn't he, I think?
Oh, I don't know.
He's on £300 a day for sleeping.
I mean, he must be squirming nowadays because he's been discovered.
Well, I mean, he was very upfront about what this was for when he created the GERS figures, because he basically stated that this was a way of showing the Scottish people that they couldn't survive by themselves. This was to try and quash any thoughts of being able to become independent by proving to us what poor beggars we all are, and how grateful we should be for this English benevolence that we receive constantly.
I'd love to see a timeline of when he introduced that and when other things were happening. I do remember I've had friends down in Lancashire, and I was staying with them. Now I'm trying to think when it would be. It'd be the very early 80s, and they were very Tory.
Margaret Thatcher fans.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't at all political at that time. And they said to me, because I was Scottish, they said, "You in Scotland, you are going to have an SNP government." This was way back then, yes.
What was the reasoning behind that statement?
And I said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. No, I can't believe that." But they knew back then. Now, their son-in-law or their daughter was standing for Parliament, so they were right in the know of what was happening. So they had a finger on the pulse. They had, and that's when I think they really sort of got the wind up and thought, right, let's just. And I'd love to see a timeline, and perhaps Ian Lang was round about that period. Do
you think perhaps they realised eventually that the Macron report was going to see the light of day, and that would light off the fireworks?
Yeah, well, again, when was it produced and when was it suppressed? Because we've only just discovered.
I believe it was 1974 or 73.
Right.
The Macron report was commissioned.
But it was never published.
Of course not. It was top secret for 30 years.
So maybe my friends had read the Macron report.
They must have known something. And certainly I remember Margaret Thatcher hinting that all the Scots needed to do to become independent was gain a majority of seats.
That's right, yeah.
Which we have done 3 times now, I believe, and still we haven't announced our independence. Yeah. And yet, I remember the SNP in 79 perhaps. I may be wrong about the year, but in the SNP's manifesto, one of their election manifestos, they stated that if they won a majority of seats at Westminster, that up until the evolution, their position was that if they won a majority of seats, that they would declare independence and negotiate. And it had to be 36 seats out of, at that time, 72.
Right.
Sorry, 36 plus 1, because there were 72 Scottish seats at the time. And yet they've never fulfilled that promise, which is strange.
Yes.
The SNP has had a majority of MPs for most of its tenure.
And never.
And yet we still haven't had the courage to stand up and say, well, we did what Mrs. Thatcher said we had to do.
Yeah.
And it should have been enough for us to negotiate our independence with you.
But did they make it clear that that's what they were standing on the platform of? And one of the things I know that this delay is because they're just determined that they bring everybody with them.
It's a game of brinkmanship, though.
It
it is right down to the wire. Many people are scared at the moment that the Holyrood Parliament will be at risk if we don't have a yes vote before Brexit actually occurs.
Right.
Because once the precedent is set, and the British government's already said, Priti Patel has said that freedom of movement will stop on day one, on 1st of November.
Right.
They would only need to say that the Scottish Government and devolution will also end on the 1st of November, and we are all basically cooked, because we would have no way to organise any kind of referendum unless it was an unofficial people's referendum organised by a kind of rebellious exiled parliament.
Even at that, I think it would have to be recognised by the EU because of the undemocratic process down at Westminster.
Indeed, and I think the EU is ready to recognise it. The problem is they can't say it.
And the UN.
The United Nations as well. But the UN is not always dependable as an arbiter.
No.
They do sometimes come down on the side of the larger party.
Yeah.
But the EU, not so much. I think they would see the value in retaining Scotland as a member.
Yes.
I would hope so.
Yes.
We've almost run out of time. There's one or two things just left to talk about before we finish this evening's programme. I'm just going to leave my clipboard down because it really becomes a bit of an encumbrance after a while. Okay, just before we leave all of this and the statistics and all the rest of it, there has been a demand made today by the Scottish Green Party that there is action needed immediately to deliver Glasgow's increased climate ambition.
Right.
According to this, the Green councillors in Glasgow have welcomed the ambition to make the city carbon neutral by 2030.
Gosh.
That's a heck of an ambition. We've got 10 years to clean up the whole city of Glasgow.
Right.
How on earth are they going to do this? Anyway, they include plans for a Just Transition Commission, which will protect workers' rights. They have set up a cross-party climate working group, which is instigated and chaired by a Green councillor. So it's all part of the SNP's administration in Glasgow City Council. Departments will be asked to develop detailed costed plans to deliver rapid reduction in carbon emissions required. It does sound awfully like a wish list. How do you decarbonise a city that uses so much energy and has so many vehicles?
You need to look at the transport systems and cycle lanes, photovoltaic panels on roofs, so that energy savings could be made.
Would you think that maybe a pilot scheme in Glasgow involving just that sort of activity would be worth investing in?
That would be very worth investing in, yeah.
Perhaps encouraging all Glasgow residents within the city boundaries to install
and
photovoltaic cells on their roofs.
The factories with all these roofs.
How on earth would they pay for it? This is always a question. How could we pay for that? Would it be paid for out of the savings made from things like damage caused by severe weather events? Or is it something that we will just have to pay the price for, do you think? Do we have to just pay for it and actually live a cleaner life?
Yes. I think we do. But no, Scottish Government has to invest a certain amount.
Perhaps if, I'm just thinking aloud here, but if a whole city council were to buy a massive amount of solar panels, I'm sure they could get an enormous
because they don't cost as much as they did when they first came out.
They already install them in public buildings.
Yes.
And perhaps...
But not enough. I mean, I'm amazed at how few factories have got solar panels.
But of course the cost of the energy is zero once those panels are operating. And if that is keeping houses warm, keeping them lit, allowing people to cook and have showers and all the rest of it, it's more energy that's not being made by burning things,
That's
I guess.
Right. Yes.
Okay, well, listen, I think we have just about run out of time.
Can I just say one more thing,
Of course, Dave.
in defence of my sheep?
Go on.
One of the most underexplored products from sheep is wool.
Of course.
And in terms of keeping your houses well insulated and healthy and safe, if there was funding for a processor to start a factory that takes the wool and makes it into panels for wool.
Into a kind of blanket, like a quilting.
Yeah, that you fit in between. You know these boards that you get if you're...
Yeah, you get the stuff
when you're building
you roll
the
out
house for new houses. Yes. Well, put
using
the
wool
sheep's
instead.
wool. Yes, and it's an amazing insulator. It keeps things cool and it keeps things warm.
I remember many years ago, because of my job at one time, I did upholstery as part of my job. And I remember doing a lot of research on different fibres and fabrics.
Yeah.
And I recall looking at wool and finding out that wool actually makes you warmer when it's wet.
Yes.
Because it expands. And unlike most other fibres which don't expand, wool gets bigger. And therefore it traps even more air.
Yes, that's
which
right.
I thought was remarkable,
Yes,
the idea that wet wool is actually a better insulator than dry wool, which explains a lot about how sheep survive in the windy mountains of Scotland.
Yes. And did you know that there are more than 1 million products that contain lanolin? And where does lanolin come from?
It's the waterproofing agent in wool, isn't it? It's a naturally occurring oil.
Yes. I mean, your biros, there's lanolin in that.
Is there? Mm-hmm. In the ink or in the plastic?
I think it's in the ink.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
But it's just everywhere.
Well, listen, thank you very much for being a guest tonight, Dave. It's been it's been great fun talking to you, because I do like talking to people who are not politicians.
Yes.
It makes such a nice change. Anyway, thank you for being our guest tonight.
My pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for watching tonight. I'm sorry the show was a little bit late in getting on the air. As you know, it's quite expensive making television programmes, so we rely on our viewers to sign up and to help us by becoming supporters. And you can support us by signing up for a monthly donation of £5 a week, which, if you add it up over the entire year, is far less than the BBC licence fees that you're not paying. Sorry, £5 a month. I'm sorry, I said a week. I didn't mean to say that. Sorry, £5 a month, which is good value and far better value than the TV licence, which most Scots are now not paying anymore. So if you can afford it and you like our programmes and you want us to keep them advert free, then please become one of our supporters. You'll see the details on your screen now. That's it for this evening. We will always be free to watch. There'll be no adverts, and other than your voluntary donations, we make no other requests of our viewers. Anyway, that's us finished for tonight, and as far as we're concerned here, it's been a busy night. We had a lot of news to get to you tonight, so I apologise for being a little bit late. That's it from Scotland at 7 tonight. So from all of us here at Broadcasting Scotland, and particularly the Scotland at 7 team, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next Monday.